So I guess we'll start. So basically, the reason that I support uh, the children should receive an equal amount of education on creationism and evolution is because I believe in equal emphasis on both theories, considering each of these have not been proven as facts, and both creationism and evolutionism are still, in fact, theories. Therefore, we believe that to teach the children both theories will give them an equal amount of emphasis on each of those sides, and they would have the freedom of inquiry, which would lead them to choose whichever side they choose to support. If we say we propose one specific side of the story or one specific theory to these children, we're basically doing nothing much than trapping these children in a perpetual echo chamber that they cannot escape from. They spend their educational lives in those echo chambers, learning basically that one side of the story, and maybe somehow they come to know about the other side of the story, which becomes a revelation for them, and they finally understand both sides of stories. So I believe it's equally important to teach them from the beginning that there is another side of the story. This basically boils down to basic discourse, which is very important for children, for them to even learn in the future that there are different opinions on different ideas and different things. And I personally believe that that's something very important to teach children, that you do not grow up learning just one side of the story, because otherwise it becomes more propaganda than it's education, and that's problematic for children. So even when we speak about history or anything else that happens in the past or that is supposed to be educational to the children, or to the children, we teach them both sides of the stories, because they need to know, and they need to have the ability to create their own opinions, or else we're just forcing them to believe whatever we believe, and that's essentially the foundation of where I come from in this debate. Thank you.
Okay, understandable side, and I think one thing maybe we should quickly address is just the definition of the terms in the debate title, creationism and evolution. I think evolution is pretty obvious, but creationism, I want to make sure that I express that I'm not just arguing against any specific religious system or belief, but just creationism as a whole is the idea that intelligent design more accurately explains the origin of life than evolution. And so the idea here in the title is just that it should be taught equally. And the very first point I want to bring up is simply the fact that I think equal is the key term here. I do not argue that creationism shouldn't be taught whatsoever. I do argue that creationism should not be taught with equal amount of time nor equal amount of merit in the education system as evolution. Of course, here I am also assuming we're talking about the education system, talking about public schools, and talking about all levels of it. So I'm not arguing that creationism should not be taught, rather that it does not deserve equal time in the classroom, because the extent to which creationism should be taught in schools is something along the lines of very simple. A science teacher could say, creationism is a contrasting view to evolution. You're welcome to investigate that as you wish. It should be really that simple. The notion that my opponent has brought up of they're both theories that explain the same thing, so why not bring them up, is really not fair to say. The only time evolution would be brought up in the classroom is talking about a specific biology classroom that's usually only at high school levels in the first place. That would be a science class. Biology would be, it would be strictly science, and evolution is a scientific theory, and creationism is a theory in contrast to it, but it's not a scientific theory. It kind of skips the science to it. It doesn't follow the scientific method. It doesn't act to even follow the scientific method. I don't believe most creationists try to act as if they are being very scientific, but rather just simply science by saying science is incomplete, and that's why they jump instead to creationism. And that's why I feel it's okay for a science teacher to bring it up by saying, if you are also one of those people who feel that evolution does not fully explain everything, I welcome you to look at this contrasting theory of creationism. But that would really be the only place it holds in a classroom setting, because it doesn't go any further into the scientific method. It doesn't back up any facts. It doesn't refute any facts with any more facts. And it never really claims to. It just kind of skips to that point of, we can't explain this, and therefore we believe intelligent design does a better job. And whether or not someone thinks that, I'm not trying to argue is okay or not okay, but rather, if the scientific classroom is all based on teaching science and following a scientific method and following the rules of how we call something science and then a fact, in this case, evolutionary theory, maybe called a theory, but that's still a scientific theory. It's still based off of facts. It still explains a hypothesis to the best of its ability in modern day and age, and it still has ways to go to be even more complete, but it's far more complete and actually scientific than creationism is. I'll go ahead and pass it.
Uh, I agree with the part that you said that they should be equally treated and they should be given, but I do not agree that they shouldn't be given equal importance. See, understand that where my opponent, the opposition, comes up is basically from a position of an inherent bias that the opposition comes up and says that, considerably throughout your entire speech, it basically comes out to me as evolution is the correct theory and creationism is something that's opposing evolution. See, we're not just talking about liberal, countries or United States or Western countries like that. We're also talking about conservative countries. We're talking about places where religion is a very big part of their ecosystem and their culture. So we believe in these places, evolution is the contrasting theory that comes out to the opposing theory that is being taught in the schools to children. And that is exactly where we believe that not just in science classes, but see, in countries like Bangladesh, where I come from, we have classes like we have religious classes, which are mandatory for the entirety of your high school. So in those classes, you learn about creationism and the intelligent design, but it never states that that is exactly what you're supposed to believe in. That is just one side. That is just an opinion, or that is what the religion states. And in countries like Bangladesh, people get the liberty to choose uh, whichever religious classes they would take, be it Islam, be it Hinduism, Judaism, or Christianism. So with that, we believe that each each child grows up with the ability to choose what they want to believe in, and also they have the ability to see all sides of the spectrum and paradigms. So when we're talking about conservative countries like Bangladesh and Muslim countries or any other countries, and we're even talking about states in the United States which are very conservative, evolution becomes the contrasting theory, and we believe for that to be taught evolutionism, the children are to be said that to be given equal importance. It's not just we're teaching evolutionism, and you should look at creationism as an opposing theory, but also uh, we you teach creationism and you look at evolutionism as an opposing theory, which is why we believe in both scenarios you should give them equal amount of time and equal amount of importance.
Okay, interesting take, and I like the bringing up conservative countries and in general other countries, not just America. I will give that merit, but you said in other places evolution is the contrasting theory, and what may be true, and I do respect that. I will point out that for the sake of the argument, maybe that should not be the case. It does seem like we're fighting for something greater by saying, oh, they should at least treat evolution as equal to creationism that they already teach really strongly. But the fact of the matter is that evolution is the accepted scientific fact of today, as close to fact as it can be as a scientific theory. Scientists do recognize it has way to go, but it is the only thing that explains life from a scientific perspective as thoroughly as it does. Nothing else comes close, is what 98% of scientists believe as of 2014. So if we're talking in a scientific classroom, that's the only merit it should have. If we're talking anything else like a religious classroom, religious studies in general and religions are not the same as creationism. Creationism by definition is simply just a contrasting argument to evolution. That is by definition. It has evolution in the definition. It says that creationism by definition says that intelligent design more accurately explains the origin of life in the universe than evolution. So it essentially, I don't say took evolution to kind of exist as a theory first, but that is to this day the definition it takes, because it does require that is acting an alternate in an alternate to it. So that's where I come from. I think that just because other places in the world do not even teach evolution, or maybe don't give it as much merit as they do the religious studies classes, maybe that shouldn't be the case. Maybe they should really rethink what they consider to be taught as scientific fact in their science classes. And if whatever they teach in the religious studies classes is perfectly fine, you can teach all religions in all religious studies classes. That's still not creationism, because creationism is the notion that any one of those religious studies classes offer a more viable explanation of the origin of life than evolution. And that would have to be brought up in the same scientific class that evolution is brought up in for it to be considered equal standing. That's what I'm getting at. I'm saying if we're going to bring up evolution in any one certain class, the debate title says if you were to bring up any evolution in any one certain class, then you would also have to bring up creationism in extent. Not just offering different classes on it, not just saying, oh, there's religious studies classes out there, but rather whenever you bring up evolution, you have to bring up creationism and vice versa. And every single one of those religious studies classes, by nature of this debate, you would also have to bring up evolution consistently, and that doesn't make any sense. So I think the two are fundamentally separate. I think creationism is not actually a theory at all, but rather just it's a religious answer to explain evolution, which people are not comfortable with. And that would be the extent at which a science teacher would be able to say in a science class, because it offers no science to it. And all the religious studies classes are completely separate from, I think, this argument.
Right. So I believe the debate title clearly states that children should receive equal amount of education, which does not state if it's going to be in the same class or in different classes. And if they are not taught both or all sides of each argument or each opinion or each theory, then I believe they're not getting the proper or the entire idea of the education that they should be receiving. And which is why we believe that if there aren't any classes that teach creationism, or if there aren't any classes that teach evolutionism and the intelligent design of the world, we believe that those classes should be included. Why? Because uh, let, when we consider not just America, when we consider the entire world, we're talking about people that do not completely understand both sides. So when the opposition comes up and basically says that, if they're not teaching evolutionism yet, they should be. They should start now. Well, you have to understand that there are certain aspects, there are certain things that you need to take care of before you do that. Because when you're when you suddenly say that they should be teaching evolutionism because that is the correct scientific theory, you're basically undermining the religion. You're basically telling them that whatever they've learned, and you're basically trying to change their culture and their way of teaching children, which is obviously not feasible. And we believe that is exactly where, getting both sides and creating a state where you learn both sides is much more feasible in terms of basically feasibility and what is actually possible to do for people all over the world. So we believe if we think about which side caters to the most, the highest number of people, we believe that if you teach them both sides, if you teach creationism and evolutionism, you would be able to reach out to the highest number of people, because in that way you would reach out to both spectrums of the people, where half, or let's consider some group of people believe in creationism and some believe in evolutionism, and you get to tell both of them the opposing sides, and they get to decide further. So we believe that that is exactly and essentially why we should be teaching both evolutionism and creationism with equal importance, because if we do not, we are basically undermining the opposite side, which I would not want to, because I believe both these ideas and both these theories are equally important to learn about, and that is why we should include both of them in their education.
Um, I'll quickly bring up something. You said that it would just not be feasible in certain countries, and I guess I can give that some credit, but that doesn't mean it's not what's the right thing to do. Just because it's not feasible doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying, or doesn't mean that shouldn't be our overall end goal. Maybe it's not feasible now, but it can be feasible in the long run. I think the same can be true for a lot of things historically. Even, I mean, the really kind of generalizing argument is like, oh, it's not feasible to end slavery because we need it economically, but sure enough, we did it and we got past it. It's the same thing here, where in the long run, the right thing to do is to teach children evolutionism and evolution as a whole in a scientific classroom with scientific merit, and don't just provide it as an option. Don't just provide it as like, this is something that might be true. Say, this is what scientists believe. This is how strongly they believe it. This is why they believe it. Here's all the facts behind it. Here's how it works within the scientific method. And here's why we trust the scientific method. Evolution is very strong in that sense. It has lots of evidence behind it, and it's not foolproof. And that's also why it's strong. It shows why science isn't always explain everything ever. It shows why science still has holes and why we still continue to do science, because there's still more things to discover. I think it's encouraging to children. I think it is motivating and inspires creativity and imagination. So I think all those things only empower children, especially at young adult ages when they're really trying to figure out their place in the world. And so I think just because it doesn't seem feasible in certain countries or in certain mind frames doesn't mean that it's not still the right thing to do in the context of this debate. Still, at the end of the day, is the overall right thing to do is that we should be teaching evolution, and it should be given more merit than creationism should be, even though you can still mention creationism in the classroom or in any educational setting. But if we're talking about the origin of life, we should be giving evolution a more firm footing in the classroom with more time to explain it and how it works, and be mentioning as well, creationism is an option, but it doesn't have any scientific explanation as to why it explains the origin of life. It just as intelligent design does. And if you think that that's something that you could get okay with, then you are welcome to take a religious studies class. You're welcome to take many different kinds of religious studies classes, or go to a different religious institution of your choice. That's not on this instance of public education to be providing, because public education should not be incentivizing, or rather should not be promoting any certain religious views of students other than in the historical context. It's kind of a separate debate, but I think it's still really related, because if we're talking, the reason I said that it warrants a scientific classroom is because the debate alone says creationism and evolution should be given the same, it should be treated equally, students should receive equal education in both. And I think it's heavily implied that you would only argue for creationism in opposition to evolution. I think it could also be the other way around in Bangladesh, as you mentioned, where evolution would only be brought up in opposition to creation. Still the same point being of that, okay, well, if you're going to bring up one, then it has a lot more to it. Evolution itself is just a lot stronger and more in-depth of a theory to explain, and it's going to need more time in the classroom to explain it, to be able to really convince kids that it's worth giving some credence to.
So yeah, when you come up and say that scientists believe that evolution is this theory that is not foolproof, but then again, it brings two things: creativity and motivation in children, and I believe that's great, and I believe that that is something that should be taught to children. But just like you said, it should be taught to children that scientists believe that this is a theory and this is how the world came into being, and that's fine. I mean, in science classes or in classes which are relevant to evolution, the kids are welcome to learn about these things, and the teachers and the schools are welcome to teach these to children. But then again, we look back into the global perspective where even now, even in today's world, the majority of the people believe in intelligent design. The majority of the people believe in religion. The majority of the people believe that a God created the world. And when we tell them that, you know what, you should stop teaching creationism, you should stop teaching that, and instead you should teach this scientific theory that's yet not proven, but it's a theory that's more, valid. What essentially happens is that they don't take it as, something credible or something that they should consider, but they actually take it as somebody propagating atheism, or somebody propagating something completely opposite of what they've been teaching, or how they've been looking at their views and their ideas all throughout their lives. And that essentially does more harm than it does good, because when that happens, you create this entire negative narrative against the whole idea of evolutionism, and they basically will obviously refuse to teach it to children. And secondly, they would, if if it's in the worst case scenario, they would be teaching they would be basically opposing the evolutionism theory. So we two so essentially the two goals for the children that the opposition mentioned, which is to involve them or get creativity and motivation into them. We believe that if you teach both sides, that is essentially when you are gaining their ideas, their ability for creativity and motivation. Because when you're teaching both sides, you have the ability to have you have the ability to understand both sides, and you have the motivation to learn more and get more information about both sides to decide for yourself which is the best side to choose.
I think the key thing here is that there really aren't both sides. In a public perspective, there's both sides, but scientifically, there's not. And if we are trying to tell kids that there is, if we are giving them science and saying, here's one side, but then here's another side, then that tells them that all of science has another side to it, and that maybe they shouldn't even give any science any merit. And that's just completely false. We should be putting science on a pedestal that says this has a method to it that makes it work. It's why your technology works. It's why you can trust your refrigerator to keep your food cold. It's why you have AC keeping you at a solid temperature in your room. It's why everything around you works. It's how we progress. Another thing is that using the phrase "a theory is not proven" is unfortunately really overused in context to evolution. That's not really how scientific theories work. Theories in science will never be proven. I think this is another important aspect to be teaching to children in the classroom about science or anything else. Scientific theories like evolution will never be proven. They will only show consequences that they predict to be true sometimes, but the theory as a whole can't be proven. It can rather just be shown to be true in some circumstances. And the more it shows true, the more reliable of a theory it is. The same is true for special relativity, general relativity, and the Big Bang theory of cosmology. All three of those things are taught in physics classes and astronomy classes and general science classes, both at the high school level and at university levels. And there are, people don't realize it, but with respect to special relativity and general relativity as theories, those were created by Albert Einstein. They're shown to be accurate and predictors of consequences in physics every single day. Yet there are scientific ideas out there published in papers right now that do provide alternative theories to them. And they are not accepted whatsoever in the scientific community because they overall don't have nearly as good of a footing as special and general relativity do. They don't nearly explain things as well as special and general relativity do. That is the exact same as evolution. We don't bother with creationism because it doesn't explain things nearly as well as evolutionism does. If you still want to give children the freedom to, just like how in any other classroom you could say there are other theories besides special and general relativity, they don't nearly explain things as well, so why would we bother with them in a classroom? Because that would be misleading students. Creationism would also be misleading students. That would tell them that evolution does not explain things accurately, that maybe what I'm telling you is false and I'm just wasting my time on it, when that's not the case. It is factual. It does have merit to it. It's been studied timelessly, and it really does have merit to it that is worth telling a kid factually, because explains how science works. And just because there are shortcomings to it doesn't mean it's wrong. It actually is still working to this day, and we are continuing to work on it to this day to keep it working. We don't give merit to unscientific propositions. That's the point.
See, when you tell children that this is the only theory that you should believe in and this is the only theory that's correct, they, grow up considering whatever you're saying. But some at one point of time, let's say you tell this kid in, let's say, some part of Iraq that the intelligent design is the only way, and creationism, or let's say religious ideologies, is the only thing that they've learned throughout their lives. And somehow they come across this video on YouTube, let's say, of Bill Nye explaining evolutionism, and they dig in and they find out about Charles Darwin's theory, and they're really into it. And then they realize that all of their lives they've basically been either lied to or misled. And that is exactly what we do not want them to go through. Because, see, when the opposition says that we'll be misleading them when we're talking about creationism, we believe the opposite. See, when we're talking about teaching them only one side, that is exactly and essentially when we are misleading them through a inherent bias that basically states that whatever the scientific community believes is the essential truth, and anything contrary to that is essentially wrong. So, see, when we tell them that yes, evolutionism is a scientific theory that is widely believed and is basically more factually correct than any other theories, yet the majority of the world believes in the contrary. Why is that so? So when we teach the children the why is that so of that very question, that is exactly when the children get the idea of discourse and get the idea of learning things, get the idea that education can be more than just, something that's just shoved down our throats. Because even today, public education is something that's like a chore more than something that we learn. It's something that we enjoy. So when we teach children that there is more than one side to every story, there is more than one, uh, there are many different opinions on everything that the world has to offer. That is essentially when these children grow up to thinking that what, I need to dig in more into the resources that I have, into the knowledge and whatever there's out there, books and everything. I really need to look into and find out what I should believe. And we believe that that freedom of choice, that freedom of inquiry, is really important to build those kids up into however whichever form of human beings they want to become in the future.
Okay, so I hear again those references of evolution would be teaching them only one side. And I want to go again and say evolution is not only one side. It's just rather the scientific theory that does explain the origin of life. It's not just only one side. It's just the actual only side there is scientifically to explain this. So you wouldn't be telling them creationism is wrong, but rather that doesn't explain the origin of life better than evolution does. And this is where I want to go back to saying that by nature of the title of the debate, I'm not saying you can't teach creationism at all, but the title of the debate says they have to be taught equally. And this is where I say that creationism is okay to teach, just not with equal merit or equal time as evolution. It still gives them that freedom of choice. It still does say there are other options out there. It still does recognize the shortcomings of evolution. And it still does allow them to say, you don't have to give up your religious beliefs, or you don't even have to accept this completely. It just does give evolution the accurate scientific merit it deserves, because creationism attempts to skip over all the scientific work that was put into justifying evolution, and that would not be fair, because we don't do that to the rest of anything we teach scientifically in school. Evolution is the only thing that we really step around and tiptoe around like this, and that's just not teaching it correctly. Because if we're really going to teach something that's scientific as evolution, then we want to do it justice. We want to actually explain it scientifically, explain why it works, and explain what it we want to explain what it explains and why it works. Since creationism is truly just saying, no, we don't want to believe evolution, we still think intelligent design explains it, I mean, that's really all there would be to it. So I would not want nor expect a public education teacher to sit there, go any more in depth into any one religious system or all religious systems as alternative theories to evolution, because that would be giving them more time than needed. And when we're talking about this specific example of going against evolution, because in this specific case of explaining the origin of life, there isn't much to say on creationism that wouldn't guide a student a certain way, unless you were to pick one religion to go on. If you were to choose all religions, that would take far too much time, and then that makes evolution look like it's not a just or a complete scientific theory, because you spent all this time on all religious explanations of the origin of life, and in contrast, it looks like you spent very little time on evolution, which is the only one that has so much scientific work behind it to explain why it works. Like I said, it still gives them that freedom of choice, and it's still okay to teach to an extent for a teacher to recognize there are creationist explanations of the origin of life that contrast in evolution. Here's a couple of ways how. But in a classroom setting, especially from like public sanctioned education, that's where I would say that I would not want a teacher going any much further, because it really does mislead the students from putting their trust in science as we know it.
I guess just the other thing is that when you stated that you would be neglecting religion when you are teaching you wouldn't be neglecting religion when you're teaching evolutionism, and we believe that's right, and therefore you should teach both creationism and evolutionism.
Sure, and very similarly, I do think that it's okay to teach both of them, but that creationism does not warrant enough time or merit as evolution does. Evolution deserves more time because it has more scientific basis behind it that is the nature of what public school is meant to be teaching our children, more so than